And at 10, 8, Aunt May and Mary Jane. Okay, so technically this is Spider-Man, but it's a zombie version of Spider-Man, but I'm gonna count it anyway because this is pretty damn messed up, zombie or not. On Earth 2149, an alien plague ends up infecting all superpowered individuals and turns them into zombies. However, it's later revealed that the Necronomicon from Evil Dead was actually what caused it. But after learning that the plague was actually like a bad thing, Peter ran home to get Aunt May and MJ the hell out of Dodge. But when he gets there, we get a good old case of protagonist syndrome and boom! Zombie Spider. He ends up becoming a zombie and eats the two most important people in his life. He also had a fractured jaw before becoming a zombie, so I'm sure you can imagine that this isn't a pretty sight, even by zombie standards. It may not be our Pete, but it was a version of Spider-Man, so it's fine. And at 9, Anna Marconi. Speaking of a version of Spider-Man, let's discuss the Superior Spider-Man and his fascination with Anna Marconi. Superior Spider-Man is actually Otto Octavius, who prior to the Superior Spider-Man storyline had brain swapped with Peter, yet a piece of Peter still remained in his own body, which convinced Otto to end up becoming a hero, albeit a darker one. Doc Ock was up to some really shady stuff while pretending to be Peter, cause you know, since Peter is young, handsome, in shape, and has actual women in his life, Otto tried his luck at getting MJ to sleep with him, but failed miserably. So, you know, things weren't going that well. But then there's Anna Marconi, whom this Otto-Peter hybrid started dating. She had no idea what the real situation was going on inside that noggin, and while it's unclear if they ever actually hopped on the good foot and did the bad thing, it's obvious that things were at least heading in that direction. Otto was in love with her, which was a surprise since he even decided to give Peter back his body to save her, but it was still an absolutely horrific story, immoral, in the highest class of the word. It's creepy as hell and it makes me rethink all relationships. And at 8, interfered with surgery. In the same series as the Anna Marconi situation, the small bit of Peter that was left in his body was trying to regain control, for obvious reasons, because, you know, a supervillain was piloting his bone mech with meat armor. This small bit of Peter though was at times able to interfere or even control Otto temporarily. One of these moments came in Superior Spider-Man number 8, where there was a device that was capable of wiping Pete from Otto's brain, but to get it he had to perform surgery on a little girl. However, Peter didn't think that Otto could do it, so he tries to stop Otto from even performing the surgery, while he has his Spider-Man mask on, may I add, and an additional face mask, so if evil Spider-Man can do it, so can you. Even still, trying to prevent the surgery to save a little girl's life is a pretty low moment for the Barnacle, even if it was filled with good intentions. Kind of. Those only power crystals, you know. Actually, is that how it works? I don't know. I don't think like Topaz is gonna cure my depression or something. And in 7, scarring Harry Osborn. While Spider-Man 3 in and of itself is one of the most despicable things that Spider-Man has done, well, with the exception of that sweet dance scene, one of the most horrible things actually in the movie is during the final fight between Harry and Peter. Peter shows up at Harry's house wearing the black symbiote costume and is mad about Goblin Jr. being the reason that MJ left Peter. However, this fight is about more than that, since Harry still blames Peter for killing his father, and Peter is done trying to convince him. After wailing on him a little bit, Peter kicks Harry into the path of a rogue glider, sending him flying into a shelf of good old-fashioned pumpkin bombs. After some mental torment, he knocks Harry out against the wall, at least so he thinks. But in fact, Harry is awake, and as Peter is walking away, Harry decides to chuck a pumpkin bomb at Pete, who dodges it thanks to his spider sense, but then thanks to the symbiote throws it back at Harry, causing it to explode basically right next to his face. If it weren't for the Goblin Serum, Harry would definitely be dead, and honestly, even with it, I'm surprised that he survived. But you do have to admit, it was pretty damn cold, but Harry also did kind of deserve it. And at 6, assorted killings. For being a hero that has a strict no-killing rule, Spider-Man has killed quite a few people, but perhaps most notably Logan's friend Charlie, in the graphic novel Spider-Man vs. Wolverine from 1987. The plot of this is that both Wolverine and Spidey end up in Berlin for their own reasons, and as the title suggests, Wolverine and Spider-Man end up fighting each other, in a graveyard to be exact. The fight is actually a good one, with Spidey even having the mindset to kill Wolverine because Logan might kill him first. They don't know each other that well at this point. The fight ends only when a helicopter of bad guys shows up looking for Logan's friend Charlie. Wolverine wanted to help his friend stop killing, but now since this helicopter showed up, Wolverine wants to kill her quick, since, you know, they aren't going to. Which he doesn't actually have to do because Spider-Man does. After Charlie intentionally sets off his spider sense and gets a super-powered spider punch to the face, killing her instantly. Halfway through and at number 5, kissed Gwen's daughter. After learning that your father isn't actually your father, but rather your mother's ex who she cheated on with his worst enemy, what do you think you would do? Also, you're aging more rapidly because your real father has some form of goblin serum in his system that somehow passed on to you, but you only age up physically, so you're mentally 10 with the body of an adult. yeah, you may want to skip this number. Since Pete and Sarah end up getting closer after fighting off dealers in Paris, but this was made even worse when they're in Paris without MJ, who Peter didn't bring for whatever reason. The thing is though, Peter thinks that this is entirely platonic. This just goes to show you that if your partner thinks that someone's trying to get with you, you should listen. Because lo and behold, Sarah ends up planting one on her almost dad, just as MJ shows up for a surprise visit. And I think the name of the storyline, Sins Remembered, is way too fitting and is definitely going to be seared into my brain now. God damn it. You thought that Gwen and Green Goblin was bad? Oh boy. And it forestalled his marriage. After siding with Tony in the events of the first Civil War, Spider-Man has to reveal his identity to the world in order to continue fighting crime. And you know, since now every supervillain on Earth knows how to get to Spider-Man, Kingpin ends up attacking Peter at his home. He dodges the bullets, but they end up hitting Aunt May instead, putting her in critical condition. This is the start of the One More Day storyline, probably the most universally hated Spider-Man run of all time. Since in order to save Aunt May, Peter talks to Mephisto and ends up selling his marriage to MJ in order to save his aunt. So their entire marriage will get erased so that he can have at least one more day with his aunt. Aside from living with the consequences of your actions, because you know, that's not what heroes do. Which is also pretty goddamn horrible. You wanna know what else is pretty goddamn horrible? Like, MJ had to agree to it as well, or at least she had to say that she did. But like, seriously, if you're being realistic, okay? How many years does Aunt May really have left? Okay, like, honestly, not many. So selling your marriage to bring back your one foot in the grave aunt just seems like a not so even trade to me. I'm just saying. MJ's gonna be around for longer. You heard it right, ladies. I'd let my old aunt die for you. Hit me up. Getting close to the end into number 3, One Moment in Time. The One Moment in Time story comes after the One More Day story, and this seems to be the storyline that No Way Home is taking inspiration from. However, after saving Aunt May, Wilson Fisk ends up sending a hitman after MJ's Aunt Anna Watson, but the hitman, revealed to be Eddie Brock, ends up attacking Mary Jane. Peter takes the wounded MJ to Doctor Strange, who heals her, but Peter also insists that Doctor Strange performs a spell that causes everyone to forget that he's Spider-Man, because again, not living with the consequences of his actions. Strange contacts Iron Man and Mr. Fantastic for advice, and they end up agreeing with him eventually. They do, however, decide that nobody should remember who Peter is aside from Peter. Not Doctor Strange, not Tony, not Mr. Fantastic, not MJ. But Peter, being Peter, jumps out of his protective bubble and grabs MJ and pulls her in before the spell's complete. They wake up in a motel and Peter explains what happened. Mary Jane asks why he couldn't just let her forget, and then she explains that she can't be with him because it's only a matter of time before somebody rips off his mask again and they go after her family, and that's a danger that she can't let happen. Back in the present though, Mary Jane also explains that he has to move on and find somebody who can be with him. Should've just let her forget it, man. Penultimately, into number 2, Hit Mary Jane. To get things straight, I understand that finding out that you're actually a clone and that the real Peter Parker has been living his life for the past few years as Ben Reilly because he thought he was the clone would be pretty earth-shattering, but nonetheless, it doesn't excuse this behavior. You may be under a lot of stress, but you never hit or take it out on your partner in any way whatsoever. No matter what gender you are or aren't, you just don't, okay? But Peter didn't get that memo for a minute, since in the Clone Wars storyline after finding this out, Peter and Ben are in the middle of a scrap. Mary Jane admittedly doesn't make the brightest move though when she attempts to break the two up, but Peter instinctively backhands her across the room, a moment we see referenced in Spider-Man 3 in the cafe that MJ works at. However, in the comic, Mary Jane was actually currently pregnant with his child, and while Peter does instantly regret this and is filled with shame and guilt, he runs away. He doesn't check on his pregnant wife. He flees and joins up with Jackal, so yeah. Not the finest moment there, dude. Finally, in at number 1, Killed Mary Jane. I know I say I hate talking about this, but honestly, if I have to suffer through this knowledge, so does everyone else. It's like my own way of being a supervillain. In the Spider-Man Reigns storyline, it's revealed that Mary Jane is dead, but it's also revealed later on why she's dead, since she was married to Peter, and as I've mentioned, did eventually want to have kids with him. The thing is though, a radioactive spider bite in your hand does more to a man than lets him stick to walls and perform incredible acrobatics. It also fills that man with radiation, and anything else he feels also gets filled with radiation, if you catch my drift. Whether you're role-playing a lab experiment or not, that's what ended up happening after all, since Mary Jane ends up dying of cancer thanks to the radiation that Peter was packing in those swimmers. Yeah, it's absolutely horrible, and while yes, it's a question that everyone had, It's not something we ever wanted an answer to, especially if this is the way that it was gonna go.
Coming in at number 10, we have the disfigurement of the tragic villain known only as Bootface. Batman is infamous for having a strict rule against killing any of the henchmen or villains he often fights against, but that doesn't stop him from doing some major damage, and no one shows that off clearer than Bootface. A former criminal who made the extremely unfortunate choice to try and attack Batman with a flamethrower, Bootface was permanently scarred when his flamethrower malfunctioned, and Batman kicked him in the face during the fire, grafting the imprint of Batman's boot directly on Bootface's, well, face. Bootface would return as part of a group of similarly injured villains that wanted revenge on Batman for permanently altering the course of their lives, and while it could be argued that maybe these guys shouldn't have been living a life of crime in the first place, it still is pretty messed up just how far Batman is willing to go, even if he's technically not breaking his no-killing rule. Coming in at number 9, we have the time that Batman made Robin dig his own grave. Yes, the Silver Age of comics has more than its fair share of wild moments, but few can probably compare to the cover image of Jimmy Olsen and Robin being forced to literally dig their own graves while Batman wields a Tommy gun. Now, apparently the actual story behind this cover is because Batman has lost his memory and been convinced that he's actually a member of the Mafia. While Superman still retained his sense of self, he had to pretend to go along with the Mafia act until he was finally able to return Batman's memories, but not before likely traumatizing Robin and Jimmy Olsen for life by making them dig their own graves at gunpoint. Coming in at number 8, we have the time that Batman launched a villain into space. Once again, Batman's no-killing rule was placed under a bit of stress when Batman Incorporated's Japanese division found itself under attack by the immortal supervillain Lord Deathman, a bad guy that was even able to resurrect himself from having his corpse thrown into a literal volcano. Outraged at the destruction that Deathman had caused, Batman's solution was a fate even worse than death, locking the villain within an unbreakable safe and then launching that safe into the darkness of outer space. Sure, the bad guy is not gonna die, but trapped in a small box floating endlessly for the rest of eternity? That's a bit of a yikes punishment, Batman. Coming in at number 7, we have Batman deciding to resurrect the Joker. Batman's always been in a weird moral place with how often he's let the Joker live, and the question of how many people have died because Batman refused to end his archenemy's life is an often asked one. But when the Joker was betrayed by Ra's al Ghul and left to bleed out, Batman made the hasty decision to save his nemesis with the power of the resurrecting Lazarus pits. And while resurrecting the Joker did allow Batman to stop Ra's al Ghul's bioweapon from being unleashed, the Joker soon returned to his evil and crazy ways, leaving Batman potentially to blame for any further death and destruction the Joker might cause. Coming in at number 6, we have a Golden Age Batman highlight with the time he straight up murdered a henchman with the Batplane. Batman's earliest adventures are notable for not quite having polished out the details of the character yet, with stories featuring him using guns and being a lot less uptight about the whole no-killing thing. One of the biggest examples was how Batman treated the superpowered henchmen of the villain Dr. Hugo Strange in the very first issue of his self-named series, using the Batplane's machine guns to take out a criminal truck driver before using a noose on the back of the Batplane to wrap around the neck of a genetically altered mental patient labeled as a monster. You'd think that maybe the comic would imply that Batman was just airlifting the monster somewhere else, but the narration makes it clear that nope, Batman just flat out hung a guy. The 1940s were definitely a different era. Coming in at number 5, we have Batman spying on the entire superpowered population with Brother Eye. Following an event in which Batman had his memory wiped by Zatanna and then eventually remembered it, Batman realized he would never be able to fully trust the Justice League, or any powerful metahumans for that matter. In a case of majorly overcompensating for this issue, Bruce Wayne constructed Brother Eye, an artificial intelligence housed in a secret satellite that kept tabs on every superpowered being on the planet, all without anyone knowing they were being watched. Of course, this tech would later be manipulated and abused by the villain Maxwell Lord, showing that sometimes Batman's paranoia can go a bit too far and have disastrous effects on the rest of his team. Coming in at number 4, we've got the time Batman was the worst friend ever and slept with Barbara Gordon behind Dick Grayson's back. In the alternate future where the animated series Batman Beyond takes place, Terry McGinnis eventually found out the reason that Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson were no longer on speaking terms. Apparently, Bruce and Barbara Gordon, the girl that Dick was absolutely crazy about, had a relationship that ended in a miscarriage while Dick was out of the city dealing with personal issues. This is some incredibly heavy stuff to put in the comic follow-up to an animated children's series, and it really seems out of character for Batman to betray his protege so deeply and then handle the fallout so poorly. Whether it's iffy writing or just a really dark take on Bruce Wayne's personality, breaking the hearts of two people he claims to care about the most is a really bad look. Coming in at number 3, we've got to go with Batman keeping logs on how to defeat the rest of the Justice League. During an event known as the Tower of Babel, Ra's al Ghul manipulated his daughter into giving up Batman's secret files that he had assembled on all the Justice League members and how exactly to defeat them if they ever went rogue. And while Batman claimed this was all because of the very real possibility of the team being compromised or being controlled by an enemy force, it's kind of hard to defend your choice as being the right one when Martian Manhunter was lit on fire, the Green Lantern was made blind, and Superman was poisoned with red kryptonite. Bruce Wayne may be smart, but in the hands of a villain, his plans just might be deadly. In a similar vein, coming in at number 2, we have Batman hacking Cyborg the very first time they met. While this incident occurred in the alternate Injustice universe, the idea behind it is essentially the same as our last entry. Batman has a hard time trusting people, and sometimes that gets revealed at the exact wrong moment. With the Justice League divided as Superman becomes a villain in this universe, Batman temporarily injures Cyborg with an electrical virus, which Cyborg quickly realizes would be impossible with his new firewalls, and then makes the realization that the virus's date signature reads as the very first week that Cyborg and Batman ever met. Ice cold, Bruce. Ice cold. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have to go with Batman's treatment of Robin in the infamous series All-Star Batman and Robin. There's always been a bit of weirdness to the dynamic of Bruce Wayne teaching a child or teenager to become a violent vigilante sidekick in his quest for justice, but this alternate universe miniseries by Frank Miller definitely takes the cake. With this version of Batman constantly verbally berating Dick Grayson with some dated language that we definitely can't use on this channel, the worst moment of all comes when Batman locks Dick inside the Batcave as some form of intense training under pressure, forcing the boy to live in pure darkness and eat rats to survive. With all the awful things Batman has done over the years, torturing this young boy who just wants to be a hero might be one of the worst.
And at 10, faked Clark Kent's death. Jesus, there's a lot wrong with this number already, and we're only at number 10. Oh boy, this is bound to be a fun list. Starting off, Superman wasn't really a good person. He was nowhere near the perfect cookie cutter guy that we know today. He was actually quite toxic to Lois when things first started. Case in point, Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane. This 137 issue story features a lot of questionable moments, but one of these things is when Lois Lane disguised herself as the French actress Lois Laflamme so that she could get close to a foreign dignitary for an interview. Superman decides that he has to teach her a lesson for using such tactics in the pursuit of a story, so he falls for Lois Laflamme as Clark Kent. When she rejects his marriage proposal, he pretends to kill himself right in front of her by jumping off a building just to make Lois feel bad. Although he claims that he's doing it as well because he needs to change into his Superman costume in midair because one of the rooms in the hotel they were on was robbed that day, but I think we all know the only reason why he did it. And at 9, prosecutes Lois. In issues 99 and 100 of Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, we see Lois be charged with the murder of Lana Lang. Lois gets into an argument with Lana Lang when they were secretly both invited to a talk show in Gotham City to talk about how much they know Superman during Superman Appreciation Day. I don't know why they're celebrating Superman in Gotham since he hardly does there, but whatever. But on the drive home, Lois and Lana get into a car crash, but only Lois makes it out alive. Batman ends up defending her in court for some reason. I really don't know why. I doubt he passed the bar. But with Batman defending her, the DA's office figures that the only man who can defeat Batman in court is Superman. Thus, he becomes a special prosecutor and prosecutes the love of his life. I mean, he was like forced to do it, but still, what the actual hell is going on with the series? And at 8, killed Lois. While the classic "Oh, Superman killed Lois" scene is typically pulled from the Injustice series, where Supes is tricked into killing that Lois and their unborn son by thinking they're actually Doomsday thanks to a special breed of Joker gas, I'd rather talk about the other time Lois gets killed because of Superman. By getting her pregnant. Yeah, that's right. You thought Spider-Man was the only one who had issues getting women pregnant with his radioactive swimmers? Well, the Man of Steel and the Woman of Kleenex are certainly not as good a match as some may think, considering how in Adventures of Superman Annual number 3, Lois gets pregnant and is then killed by the baby after getting a superpowered Kryptonian kick from inside the womb. Or at the very least a future version of her does, which either way is still messed up as hell. Even if you didn't think it would happen, I mean, like, you kinda need to expect something like that. To be fair, the baby had also not really been exposed to the sun directly, so maybe he shouldn't have had powers to begin with, but I mean, like, couldn't they just have kept Lois in like a chamber with a red sun or something? I mean, I don't know, there were ways to avoid it. And at 7, desecrates Lois's grave. Yeah, that's not even the worst part about this issue, it gets worse. After finding out that Lois is going to die from their baby, Superman tried to kill himself by flying into space as far as he could from Earth. But when he does, he meets an alien warrior princess named Maxima, who he then proceeds to hook up with on Lois's grave. Which is probably the most disrespectful thing you can do on your former lover's grave, I'd think. Especially when the headstone has a line from you that reads "There can only be you," and a wreath that you had left presumably earlier that day, at least. Or if not, earlier that week. But like, yeah. That's probably one of the most problematic covers ever that features Superman, especially at the point that it was released. I'm sure that there's been problematic things since, but oh. And at 6, eviction. In Superman's 8th ever appearance in Action Comics number 8, he didn't seem to really have a grip on the whole how to be a good guy thing. Since after a group of kids commits a crime to join a gang, Superman takes the gang out thinking that it will save the kids. But they don't want to reform, they just want to keep being bad. Probably because the whole like, the gang is the only people who care about me kind of thing or something like that, right? That's usually the line. Well, want to know how Superman fixes that? Not by sending them to jail or getting the cops to take him for some kind of scared straight thing. No, he instead gets an idea from a hurricane and starts tearing the poor neighborhood apart. Yeah, thinking that when he's done, the town will be rid of its quote, filthy crime-festering slums. I mean, I guess it kinda worked in a way, since the government ends up rebuilding modern apartment units there that are definitely too expensive for the previous residents. So the crime does leave because the people have to leave as well. Huh. Halfway through into number 5, exposed Batman. While this seems like something that any version of Superman would do if they turned bad, it's actually interesting to see that only the Injustice version of Superman did it. Yeah, after getting fed up with Batman leading the resistance against his totalitarian regime, Superman tells the world that Batman is really Bruce Wayne. How does he do this, you ask? Like a press conference or like a worldwide news message or video maybe? Nope, none of the above. This dude frickin' outs him on Twitter. Superman, in just 4 simple words, tells the world that Batman is Bruce Wayne. Using those 4 words, actually. From the official Superman Twitter account, by the way. Dude doesn't even use his Clark Kent Twitter. Man, he's still hiding behind his identity, but then decides to out Bruce's. It's a damn shame. With over 2.5 million retweets and over 3.5 million favorites, this was certainly number 1 on trending for sure. At least until Kim K posted a pic in like a Batman costume to capitalize on the news, pushing the actual Bruce Wayne as Batman thing to number 2 on trending. That's probably what would have happened. Let's be honest. And at 4, World War II propaganda. When World War II was ongoing, a load of the population turned to superheroes to provide hope. This is where we got Captain America and more. But this also turned Superman into the noble American hero that we know him for today. However, that caused him to be a little more on the prejudice side of things in his material. It was mostly to encourage able-bodied men to enlist and others to buy war bonds to fund their soldiers. But my question is, why did you have to lean so hard into the whole race thing? going, really, DC? Like, Superman was literally printing posters that said things like, Superman says you can slap a Japanese soldier with war bonds and stamps, with a very stereotypical drawing on them as well as some offensive slurs. So yeah, that's pretty messed up. They also did this to avoid having Superman just like straight up end the war, because like, let's be honest, if he was fighting, there would be no war. They came up with various excuses for it too, like Clark Kent accidentally using his X-ray vision to read the wrong eye chart while trying to enlist, resulting in him being rejected. Getting close to the end, in at number 3, made a film with his friend's wife. A lot of people make fun of the adult film industry, okay? But honestly, it's the backbone of the economy, at least in some cases. However, Superman has never shied away from helping small business owners, especially in Action Comics number 592 and 593. That's right, before Kim K had her go at it, Superman tried the whole celebrity tape thing, with the help of a character named Sleaze, one of Darkseid's former enforcers. Superman tracks down a missing new god, Big Barda, to Metropolis' roughest neighborhood, the Suicide Slum. There, Superman discovers that not only has Barda been brainwashed by Sleaze, but the Apocalypse native is using her to produce a line of popular adult films. Superman tries to rescue her, but ultimately falls under Sleaze's control as well. And Sleaze does exactly what you would expect. He becomes sleazy. He takes Barda and Superman to the local videographer and makes some naughty videos. Then her husband walks in. It's certainly an interesting couple issues. Penultimately, in at number 2, Executioner. Nowadays, Superman doesn't really kill, aside from a few moments, Man of Steel and Injustice most notably. However, there wasn't really an origin for this moral code. We just kind of assumed that he was a good guy that didn't want to kill. However, writer John Byrne wanted to answer that unasked question in Superman number 22, one of the most controversial Superman stories ever. In this issue, Superman finds himself in a pocket dimension where a group of 3 Kryptonian soldiers had wiped out all life on Earth, with the exception of Bruce Wayne, Lex Luthor, and a synthetic life form that was calling itself Supergirl. They try to fight the criminals, but they're not really a match for them, which results in Supes taking some unexpected actions. He exposes the group, which also included an alternate reality version of General Zod, to golden kryptonite of their world, resulting in them permanently losing their powers, and him keeping his since it wasn't kryptonite from his world, it was from their pocket dimension. But Zod still threatens Superman and says that he'll track him down and destroy his Earth, even though he literally has no powers. But instead of just abandoning them on a dead planet, Supes thinks that that's not enough, so then he kills them with kryptonite. However, he is still grief-stricken and then promises that he will never kill again. My question is, why'd you have to pull out the green kryptonite? You already took away their powers. Couldn't you just have like... Finally, in at number 1, ruled the world. Oh boy. Usually when people talk about ruling the world and Superman, they talk about Injustice again. And while this is a great story and an example of what can go wrong with superheroes, the story of King of the World is also a good cautionary tale about Superman. In the late 90s, this story featured a series of prophetic dreams that make Superman realize that his regular MO, just flying around and waiting for disasters to happen, isn't really working. And Kal-El decides to be a little more proactive. However, to him that means building a series of spy satellites to survey Earth, helping Superman keep track of everything that's happening at once, all over the globe, and giving up his life as Clark Kent to work as Superman full-time. Sleep deprived and losing his grip on humanity, as well as his sanity, Superman starts to interfere more and more with Earth's affairs, toppling extremist governments and even changing the weather. But when he realizes that he can't be everywhere at once because, you know, it's the whole world, the Man of Steel deploys an army of Superman robots to help maintain law and order, effectively making Superman a benevolent dictator. Only snapping out of it when he gets a kiss from Lois Lane. This is what happened, okay? This is what No Nut November will do to the weak-minded, okay? Superman wouldn't stand a chance. Also, I find it funny how he made flying robots, because the Man of Steel made Men of Steel.
Number 10, killed his lover's brother. I mean, granted, his lover Clara Creed's brother Saul did set him up to be recaptured by Mr. Sinister. And yes, I did say Creed. This was established in the comic Origins number 2. It was here that we learned that Clara, Victor Creed's sister, was once the lover of Wolverine. Saul became jealous of Wolverine's close relationship with his sister, and so he decided to sell him out to Sinister. Well, him and her. Clara was seemingly killed by Essex, but recovered due to her healing factor. after, and Wolverine later realized the truth, that Saul was the one who had sold them out. In a fit of rage, he drowned Saul Creed in a vat of liquid in Sinister's lair. The same liquid that Essex planned to use on Logan to wipe his mind clean. Despite the fact that Saul was not really a great person, Wolverine still did not need to kill him here, and continued to drown him even as Clara begged Logan to stop hurting her brother. Wolverine killing Saul was also what would be explained as the reason why Sabretooth visits him every year on his birthday to torment him and fight him. That was what Victor used to do apparently to his little brother Saul every year. Because Victor could no longer punish Saul, he instead decided to punish the man who took his little brother away from him. It's like a weird, like, I loved my brother because I loved beating him up. Number 9. Didn't lift a finger to save a kid. Later on, when a very young prisoner of war was about to be shot upon his release by the rebel faction that Wolverine was working with, Logan did not do anything to stop it. Granted, he did figure that Eric, who had agreed to take care of that prisoner, Jamie, would do the right thing. Jamie was seemingly freed by his captors, but this was all to give him one last moment of joy before they took his life. They were like, yeah, you can go free, and then they're like, now we'll shoot him. Fortunately, while Eric took on the burden of killing Jamie, he actually did this so that he would be sure that the boy would truly go free, pretending to have missed the shot, allowing young Jamie to escape. Eric, by the way, is also the well-known author George Orwell, which is his pen name. This is a gloriously weird story that this point comes from, as evident by the fact that, yeah, George Orwell is in the story. This act, or lack thereof, comes to us from issue 36 of the 1988 Wolverine series. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists about Wolverine, I love talking about Wolverine, so be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. More mutant lists. Blah! Number 8. Killed a newly powered mutant. The newly powered mutant in question doesn't even have a name and is a high school kid. This of course all went down in the Ultimate Universe, which is a much harsher and gritty world by comparison to the Earth of 616. Still, Wolverine kills the kid who had just learned he is a mutant because it had been deemed that that kid is too dangerous. His powers allow him to basically vaporize people in his vicinity, and you get to see it happen in this issue as well, and I will say it's pretty brutal. It's like he like burns people sort of from the inside out is what it looks like. Without meaning to, this kid vaporized all the people in his hometown, including his own family and his girlfriend. Rather than try to help this poor kid, it's decided the best thing for all of mutant kind, though maybe not this youngster himself, is for him to die. Wolverine is sent on a mission to deal with this new mutant. He talks to the kid and does his best to explain sort of what's going on and what's gonna happen. He isn't a cold-hearted killer after all, but he also still goes through with the mission without even seeming to question if it's the right thing to do. I mean, come on, Wolverine. It's just a kid. The two mutants go up to a cave in the evening and Wolverine gives him a beer and explains the whole situation. And in the morning, only Wolverine leaves the cave, implying the despicable deed has been done. Also, this kid never even got a name. Number 7. Kidnapped a nun. Now granted, Wolverine did this to actually try and help a recurring rival of his from back in Madripoor, Roughhouse. Roughhouse, you see, had been taken by the evil cyborg Geist, who had been around since World War II and had a history of working for villainous world leaders, including the Fuhrer. Geist had taken Roughhouse to use him for experimentation, as he was trying to use a very intense type of cocaine to turn Roughhouse into a hero for the nation of Terra Verde, and more specifically its militaristic and villainous ruler at the time, President Caradid. However, the cocaine had some alarming side effects, and that's why Wolverine kidnapped the nun. She was a healer known as Sister Salvation, who was actually once the wife of the president before seeing the sins of her lifestyle and her husband and renouncing her marriage and becoming a nun as a result. Sister Salvation was the only one who could calm Roughhouse's unbridled rage and heal his disfigurement, symptoms of the cocaine. It's actually even implied that Sister Salvation may have been a mutant this whole time. But anyways, so even though she had done nothing wrong, Wolverine took her with them by force, so that Sister Salvation could help keep Roughhouse in check. This all went down in issues 20 to 21 of the 1988 series of Wolverine. Also, I love this entire story, so you should go read it. Is good. Number 6. Killed Hank Pym. Of course, he had a pretty good reason to do so, and this wasn't actually main continuity Hank Pym. This was a Hank Pym from a time when Wolverine had time traveled back to in order to prevent the creation of Ultron to begin with, killing Hank of Earth 26111 before he could bring Ultron into existence. Time travel. Unfortunately, although he had good intentions here, Wolverine actually made everything even worse by doing this, and while the disaster that was Ultron was avoided, worse ones quickly popped up in his place. Enter Morgan Le Fay's magics versus Tony Stark's science. This all went down in the Age of Ultron series, with Wolverine killing Hank in issue number 6, with the aftermath spilling out into the following issues. Also, this is just another reason to just be like, hey, don't do time travel. It usually doesn't work out. Just don't do it. If you're like, maybe I'll time travel to fix everything. No, I've read too many comics about this, I've seen too many movies, it's gonna be a bad idea overall. Except for maybe Back to the Future, although it goes wrong and then it usually goes right by the end. Comedies. Number 5, killed his childhood sweetheart. Now granted, Wolverine didn't mean to kill Rose, it just kinda happened, but he still did it. Rose was Logan's childhood friend and sweetheart back when he was known as James Howlett. When James left his family home, which was tragically torn asunder, Rose went with him. Eventually, she was courted by a man who wanted to marry her, and she agreed, breaking young Wolvie's heart. Ouch. In the end, however, Logan was drawn back into a fight with his former friend / rival growing up, Dog. Dog had returned to kill Logan and seemingly also do harm to Rose, or take her with him, or some other terrible thing. The two got into a fight, and it came to the point where Logan was about to kill Dog. Not wanting Logan to be a murderer, Rose urged him to stop, heading towards him, and in the midst of a panicked crowd, tripping and stumbling as she rushed to his side and becoming impaled on his bone claws. How tragic. Even Logan was aware of how terrible this was. What's worse is it seemed like Rose the whole time actually had loved him. I mean, they were kind of pretending to be cousins at this point, so it was kind of a thing where they were like, maybe we both have feelings but we can't be together. Rose died and Logan lost his mind, turning feral under the weight of what he had done. This all went down in backstory series Wolverine: The Origin, with Rose's death happening in issue number 6. Number 4, put moves on MJ. This one went down in the Ultimate Universe, but although it wasn't 616 Wolverine who was responsible, it was still a Wolverine. Just the Wolverine of Earth 1610 instead. In the Ultimate Universe, at one point, Wolverine and Spider-Man swap bodies. This all happens because, well, Jean is mad at Logan, which is maybe one of the most despicable things that Jean has done, making Wolverine swap bodies with someone that he hates, but I guess we'll save that for our Jean Grey version of this list. While their bodies are swapped, it turns out Wolverine got some alone time with Mary Jane while in Peter's body. We later learn, once the two heroes have swapped back, that Logan, in Peter's body, attempted to put the moves on MJ and even tried to sleep with the young lady, which is pretty despicable for like a long list of reasons. And I don't think I have to go into them because I think you know what they are. Number 3, trying to shame the Punisher, which admittedly doesn't sound that despicable. Like on paper, trying to shame someone doesn't sound that bad, until you understand the whole context in which Logan tried to shame Frank here. This really comes down to a sort of comic book writer feud, wherein Frank Thierry, longtime writer on the Wolverine series, decided to get back at Garth Ennis for his brutal rendition of the fight that happened between Wolverine and the Punisher in his own Punisher run. Ennis's fight happened in Punisher issue 17, back in the 2001 series. That fight really only started because Punisher made fun of Wolverine's height. Their team up there also started with them taking on a group of people with dwarfism, and then of course ends with Wolverine getting steamrolled by Frank, and I mean literally steamrolled with a steamroller. To get revenge though, Frank Thierry sank pretty low. At the end of his fight with the two heroes in issue 186 of Wolverine, he has Wolverine discover Punisher's bodybuilding mags, and basically makes fun of him for having them and trying to shame the Punisher because he believes that he's gay. That's pretty awful. Now granted, Wolverine in the present day is a proud parent of Akihiro, aka Daken, his openly bisexual son. So obviously I don't think this writing reflects the modern day character, but like, yeesh. Is a pretty bad. It was a weird time, friends. Number 2, drowned his own son in a puddle. Speaking of Akihiro, I mean exactly what I just said is really what happened here. Granted, like so many awful things that Wolverine has done on this list, this one also wasn't directly his fault. He and his son Daken, aka Akihiro, were manipulated by Sabretooth, which is what led to this moment. The most tragic element of this whole thing is that he knew what he was doing was wrong, and sadly just spent time reflecting on what his life could have been like with Daken if he had actually been able to grow up with his father around. They could have had a beautiful relationship instead of hating and wanting to kill one another. Wolverine thinks on this, imagining what their lives could have been like, all while drowning Daken in a puddle. If you want to see this heartbreaking horror show of this son versus dad battle, check out issue 34 of the first volume of Uncanny X-Force, which started in 2010. Also, I believe that's Rick Remender and Phil Noto, and you know I love Phil Noto, and also Remender's done some pretty cool stuff, so it's a good one, but a tragic one. Number 1, forgot about his kids, then killed them. Never mind. Wolverine just killing Akihiro, who admittedly in the past has also been pretty evil, so as awful as that was, there was still kind of an element to that where it almost felt fair. It was still sad, but you were like, I mean, he's kind of a bad guy. But Wolverine's fights against his children is not a saga that ends there. In fact, there was another time in the comics where Daken actually pitted his dad against his fellow half-siblings, all children of Wolverines that he either never knew about or had forgotten as a side effect of his healing powers and his super long lifespan. This team was brought together by Daken and he called them the Mongrels. Or well, brought together by Daken and the Red Right Hand at least called them the Mongrels. They came together to take on their father, with Daken training them for the fight. In the end, however, Wolverine defeated them, killing them all. Now this of course is a win-win scenario for Daken though, because either they killed Wolverine, his own father and enemy, or they ended up killed, which meant that Daken would also have a part in hurting his dad just by revealing the truth of the team members and how they were all his kids. Really though, the greater organization behind this whole plot was the Red Right Hand, who only wanted Wolverine to suffer as they had. They were united by the fact that they'd all lost family members to Logan, who had killed them at one point or another in his very long life, which is why they pit him against his own unknown children before taking their own lives. They were like, we don't even want you to die, we just want you to hurt people that you once loved or could have loved. You know how it is. And Wolverine doesn't even know, because he's like, I don't even know who these people are, and then later finds out and is like, oh gosh, oh boy, my life is terrible. Number 10. Unmasking. During the events of Civil War, Spider-Man ultimately decided to side with Iron Man, and to prove how loyal he was to the cause, he even decided to publicly unmask, to show just how much he believed in his friend Tony Stark and the idea of the Superhuman Registration Act. However, this turned out to be the wrong choice for Peter in the end. Not only was his life at risk as a result of his choice, and as a result of ultimately changing his mind, but also the lives of those he loved were threatened as well. Peter Parker almost ended up being shot to death at the behest of Kingpin, who put a hit out on him, and as a result of surviving that, being nearly missed, Aunt May instead ended up taking a bullet and almost lost her life, being put into intensive care. Peter Parker would also end up losing his marriage after he and Mary Jane made a deal with Mephisto in order to save Aunt May's life. So really, it's pretty impressive that Peter managed to survive this whole overall fairly awful ordeal, both when it comes to keeping his life and keeping his sanity. Number 9. Witnessing Aunt May's romance. During a time where Peter swapped bodies with Dr. Octopus, he found himself trapped in his body and in Dr. Ock's mind. Because of this, Peter ended up forced to watch a memory that Otto had of a night of passion with Peter's own Aunt May before their almost wedding at the time. Sure, Peter has survived a lot of physical beatings and extremely devastating disasters, but the emotional trauma of this one, I do not know how he did it. Peter obviously did not want to see this, and yet he was forced to. And still afterward, he manages to be able to look both Otto and Aunt May in the eye when he needs to. I do not know how though. Not only did Peter survive this, by the way, but also survived witnessing all the beatings from Otto's perspective that he, as Spider-Man, had given him via Otto's memories. That is some mental and emotional durability right there. Although I guess this version of Peter kind of died, as he only managed to survive via his subconscious after this. Here's hoping he managed to forget this at least. Somehow. Maybe because only his subconscious kind of survived, his consciousness of this is like, boop, gone. I hope so. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to learn about some more crazy things that Spider-Man has survived, there's lots out there, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Electrocuted and thrown from a skyscraper. During the events of Marvel Knight's Spider-Man, as early as the 3rd issue in, Spider-Man gets badly beaten and ends up in such a bad way that he is rushed to the ER. This all happens after Aunt May has seemingly been kidnapped. In this much darker take on Spider-Man's world, as written by Mark Miller, Spider-Man confronts Electro and the Vulture, suspecting they may have been involved. During this fight, Spider-Man gets badly electrocuted more than once by Electro. In fact, at one point he is so severely and dramatically electrocuted that he ends up being flinged from a skyscraper and plummets to the ground, before he can recover enough to even shoot a web and swing to safety. Instead, he smashes all the way down and through a cab, knocked unconscious twice and badly injured. The paramedics then rush him to the hospital. That is how severely Electro injured him. Of course, this is Spider-Man, and somehow, miraculously, he manages to survive. But, whew, it was definitely a close call. Number 7. Sinister War. Sinister War also really scrambled Spider-Man up. I mean, what's worse than one team of 6 sinister villains? How about a whole bunch of Sinister 6 teams? Which is exactly the trial that Peter faced during Sinister War. Pretty much all of the villains he came up against seemed to also want Spider-Man for one reason or another. And while some fought to actually protect Spidey, many more were fighting to harm, capture, or perhaps even kill him. Needless to say, it was one long night for Spider-Man, with him dealing with fight after fight to the point that he couldn't even catch his breath. Number 6. Missile Explosion. During issues 523 and 524 of The Amazing Spider-Man, we learned that Spider-Man managed to survive the explosion of a massive missile that was filled with toxins. Not only did we see Peter survive the explosion, but he also survived the fallout after being saved by Iron Man. Stark secured Peter and took him back to the Avengers Mansion as quickly as possible so that he could treat him for the toxins he had been exposed to and his injuries. Fortunately, Peter is so durable, with such a tough immune system apparently, that he was able to fight off most of the effects until Stark managed to treat him. And in so doing, Stark saved his life. It's pretty convenient. He also happened to arrive at just the right time, as Peter was also about to fall at terminal velocity into the ocean, the impact of which could have killed him. Quite lucky that he's so tough and that Iron Man arrived in the nick of time. That all worked out pretty well. Number 5. The Wrath of the SRA. Spider-Man not only impressively survived unmasking for his pal Tony Stark during the events of Civil War, but he also managed to survive betraying Tony as well. When Spider-Man got a good look at the camp Stark's side of the war were running, he realized that he had made the wrong choice, and attempted to walk out. Iron Man, however, isn't ready to let Peter go, and attempts to stop him. He tries to tell S.H.I.E.L.D. to just bring Spider-Man in quietly, as all Tony wants to do is talk to him. He doesn't want to fight, but S.H.I.E.L.D., under the Superhuman Registration Act, denies Stark's request and attempts to have Spider-Man apprehended and arrested, sending the top secret Thunderbolts team that they have amassed after Spider-Man. They send Jack-O-Lantern and Jester the Third, and if it weren't for the interference of Punisher, he may have ended up dead at their hands. Well, S.H.I.E.L.D. was ready to rein in their team members when it came to how much force they were using, but still, they already kind of almost killed Spider-Man at that point, putting him in critical condition by the time Punisher showed up to save him. You can see the fight and the shape that Peter is in by the end of it in issue number 5 of the first Civil War series. Number 4. Beat Down by Morlun. During the story The Other, Peter seemed to be suffering from and ultimately dying of a mysterious illness. While struggling with this, Morlun decided to pay Spider-Man a visit just to basically torment him. Focused on his potential impending death, Spider-Man is caught unawares when Morlun attacks him while he's swinging around the city attempting to clear his mind. The two have an insanely explosive fight, but just as Peter thinks he has the upper hand, Morlun brutally defeats him. He plucks out Spider-Man's eye and eats it, and then beats him to within an inch of his life. Spider-Man manages to survive this attack despite him losing an eye and being beaten to a pulp by Morlun. Number 3. Killed by Kraven. In reality, Kraven never really killed Peter, although we were meant to believe that he had killed Spider-Man. I mean, it definitely looked like he had killed Spider-Man. Kraven at one point sets out in Kraven's last hunt to beat Spider-Man by replacing him and proving that he is better than Spider-Man is. However, in the end, he begins to question if he's truly beaten Spider-Man, and you know, who actually makes a better Spider? He realizes that there is no one quite like Peter Parker when it comes to being Spider-Man, just as Spider-Man himself seemingly returns from the dead. In truth, Kraven had merely administered a drug that had made Peter seem dead, probably slowing his heart rate, definitely making him trip out, and putting him in a stasis for a few weeks. Spider-Man, however, was buried alive by Kraven and wakes up in his grave. Pretty sure he was also shot point blank by Kraven, but anyways. Spider-Man then has to dig his way out and find his way back to the villain for that final confrontation. The story ends with Kraven taking his own life, believing he had finally accomplished everything in his life that he had set out to do. But don't worry, Kraven would come back, because Kraven. Number 2. Body Failure. Another time that Peter Parker died, it was actually as Dr. Otto Octavius. During the time of Superior Spider-Man, Otto got a hold of Peter's body by tricking him into a body swap. With Peter's consciousness stuck in Otto's old failing body, when it died, so seemingly did Spider-Man. I mean, we still have Peter's body, but for now, Otto was the one behind the steering wheel. Fortunately, while Peter did kind of die, he also managed to survive, as Otto was unable to wipe Peter's complete consciousness clean from his own body, and his subconscious kinda lingered there. In the end, Otto gave up his own hold over Spider-Man's body in order to let Peter Parker reclaim his body and his mantle once more. Otto was compelled to do this when he realized that even with all that he had done, he could never truly be a better Spider-Man than Peter, because he was kind of missing the moral compass, which was part of what truly made Peter Parker superior. Also, he needed Peter's help because he was like, I'm trying to save the woman I love and it's like impossible, please. I need the real Spider-Man, help. Number 1. Annihilation of his universe. Miles Morales didn't just survive the death or a bad beatdown, but actually managed to survive the destruction of his entire universe. Following the events of Secret Wars and the creation and dissolution of Emperor Doom's Battleworld, Miles Morales somehow managed to survive after his entire reality of Earth 1610 was pretty much completely destroyed. How? Well, Miles Morales' Spider-Man managed to earn a new life for his family and himself on the reinstated reality of Earth 616, all because of an act of kindness in combination with a weird quirk. Molecule Man had been asking for a snack, and Miles happened to have a burger in the pocket of his suit, which he gave him. As a result, Molecule Man decided to make sure when the universe was recreated, using his powers, that Miles and his family had a place in it. How nice. He also gave Miles' uncle Aaron Davis a new lease on life in the Earth 616 reality as well. Pretty sure he also brought his mom back to life too. Earth 1610 has returned since its destruction, and one of its other survivors, the Maker, even managed to return to it, but at the time it wasn't around. So, still pretty cool that Miles survived that. Number 10. Experimented on in Ravencroft. At one point, Sabretooth managed to capture Wolverine and handed him over to Nathaniel Essex, aka Mr. Sinister, who tormented him and also used him for experimentation. Wolverine would get out of this one by earning the sympathy of a fellow doctor who it turns out was actually a werewolf. She would help Wolverine to get free, but ultimately end up being caught by Victor Creed and Dr. Essex herself, who would then take her in Logan's place to experiment on. Poor doctor. Logan's time at Ravencroft was so bad that Victor was actually fine with not tormenting Wolverine himself, instead being content with the terrible experiments that Essex had dreamed up for Logan, believing that what he was doing was even worse than anything Victor himself could come up with. You can check out this horror story in the pages of Runes of Ravencroft, Sabretooth. Number 9. Torn in Half. It's important to note that Wolverine made his first appearance in a Hulk comic. As such, it shouldn't be surprising that these two have duked it out on more than one occasion, with Wolverine's healing factor generally being put to the test against Hulk's immense strength. In the Ultimate Universe, Wolverine isn't actually believed to have a healing factor either. More, his powers are believed to be tied to increased chances of survival and kinda evolution. In other words, it's believed that his body actually adapts to the duress it is currently under, and finds a way to just, make things work till he can recover. In the case of Ultimate Hulk vs. Wolverine, where Wolverine was torn in half in that first issue by the Ultimate version of the Hulk, in the first few pages in fact, Ultimate Wolverine then was forced to crawl around, looking for the bottom half of his torso so that he could reattach it. Yeah, a lot more gross than what we might see in the pages of a 616 Wolverine vs. Hulk comic. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to hear about more crazy stuff that Wolverine has survived, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Adamantium poisoning. What's pretty crazy is that Logan is actually battling this pretty much all the time. The adamantium that is bonded to his skeleton is actually slowly killing him, and the only thing that manages to keep him alive is his healing factor. In the Old Man Logan universe, his healing factor gets weaker with time, and eventually he begins to be poisoned to death by his own body. While he does ultimately die, it's pretty crazy to think about just how long he managed to live. And even when Old Man Logan seems to be dying in the Dead Man Logan series, he still finds a way to keep going through a lot of that with the Regenix drug. Of course, it turns out that the side effects of Regenix are also kinda lethal, and eventually Logan does run out of it, using up his last vial. So in the end, Old Man Logan just decides to give in and succumb to death. Still, he had a pretty insane run. Number 7. Devoured by the Hulk. The Old Man Logan universe is much darker than what we're used to, being set in a post-apocalyptic future where the villains actually all pretty much won against the heroes and then turned the world into kind of a wasteland. Logan is just trying to get by and no longer goes by Wolverine here. He manages to find some happiness though, settling down with a woman named Maureen and starting a family. Unfortunately, they happen to live on land that ends up in Hulk gang territory. You might think, wait, isn't Hulk a hero? Isn't this a good thing? Not here, he isn't a hero, and it definitely is not a good thing. The gamma radiation in his old age basically turns Bruce Banner insane. When Old Man Logan doesn't arrive early enough for the Hulk gang with the rent money that they believe his family owes them, they pretty much kill them all. Well, except for Logan, sadly. As a result, Logan seeks revenge on the Hulk. During their fight, Hulk eats Logan, but in the end, Logan wins, giving Hulk some really bad indigestion when he cuts his way out of his gut. Number 6. Shot in the head. I can give you at least 5 separate occasions where this has actually happened in the comics, but honestly, there are definitely many more than that, I am sure. At this point, there may have even been too many to count. I could probably make a top 10 list of just the times that this happened by itself. One of the times this happened though was when Wolverine had been possessed by the Muramasa blade, or the Ebony blade, while under the guise of Patch. He ended up capturing Jessica Drew, aka Spider-Woman, which left Patch's friends to try and recover Jess and save Logan from this evil influence. Lindsay McCabe, Jessica Drew's and Patch's good friend at the time, was the one who ended up forced to shoot Patch in the head, and she seemed pretty confused when Patch managed to mysteriously recover, because she could have sworn that, she shot him in the head. Of course, we'd later learn that Patch wasn't really fooling anyone, trying to pretend that he wasn't Wolverine because, all the X-Men were supposed to be dead at that point. So either Lindsay didn't know this yet, or was simply playing dumb to help Logan feel more confident in his disguise. To watch Lindsay wrestle with whether or not to shoot, you can check out the first arc of the 1988 Wolverine series, with Lindsay taking said kill shot in issue number 3. And I know I wrote 89, but it's actually 88. I always get that confused. 89 is the mini-series, even though that's volume 1, but it's 89, so 88, but that's volume 2. It's a little confusing, is it not? Number 5. Drowning. While this might not sound that crazy on paper in regards to everything else on this list, for Wolverine it is. It's been heavily suggested throughout history that water is not really where Wolverine is in his element. This has to do with the fact that Wolverine is actually quite heavy with all that added adamantium weight. I believe before he said it's over like 100 pounds of extra weight. He also can't really fully heal from fully drowning. Eventually, it's believed that it would kill him. And he's come pretty close to death by being stuck underwater for prolonged periods of time, which is pretty crazy considering drowning his own son, Daken, in a puddle was the way that he defeated him when the two were forced to fight one another. One time, Wolverine seemingly drowned during an underwater fight with Tiger Shark, when his claws got stuck in a coral reef. Fortunately, we learned in issue 20 of the 1988 Wolverine series that he managed to escape, and only suffered from briefly being deaf after escaping the coral and returning to land. Wolverine has also fallen into oceans and washed up on foreign shores a few times and lived to tell that tale, or those tales, although there are times when that experience seems to mess with his memories as opposed to his hearing. In fact, I'm trying to think of another time that he's drowned and his hearing has been messed up, but I mean, that definitely makes sense if you're deep underwater, because that would mess your hearing up. How come that never comes up again? Does it come up again? I don't know. Let me know if it does. Let me know what issue I need to read where that comes up again, because that would be cool. Number 4. Steamrolled. Instead of being rickrolled, he got steamrolled. During a team up with the Punisher gone wrong, Wolverine managed to survive a whole no-holds-barred fight with Frank Castle. Well, definitely no holds barred from Castle's side anyways. The Punisher shot Wolverine repeatedly with an Uzi, kneecapping him as well, and then for good measure, he also decided to just run him over with a steamroller, just to really make sure, Wolverine wouldn't be getting up anytime soon. The whole fight is brutal and really only starts because Punisher sees the opportunity to use Wolverine as a weapon, so he kinda pokes him in places where he knows he's gonna start to rage. Which, Wolverine loves when people do that. He loves when people annoy him so that he can go into a berserker rage and be used as a weapon. That's his favorite thing. The fight all went down during the days of the Marvel Knights in Punisher issue number 17 from his 2001 series, which of course was written by none other than Garth Ennis. Because, Come on, this whole fight, it definitely sounds like Ennis. Poor Wolverine. Number 3, forced adamantium removal. One of the craziest moments possibly in all of Marvel Comics has to be when Wolverine had his adamantium forcefully removed from his body by Magneto. His adamantium isn't just like a jacket for his skeleton, by the way. It's like literally fully bonded to Wolverine's skeleton and his body. And while Wolverine does have a healing factor, he still feels all the pain of his injuries. All the pain. The healing factor doesn't diminish any of that pain. So I cannot even imagine just how painful this whole experience would have been for Logan. The experience was actually so traumatic that it also seemed to turn Wolverine feral for a good amount of time in the comics, and he even seemed to lose his nose as a casualty. Well, either the loss of the adamantium was what made him feral and made him lose his nose, or the experience did, or some combination thereof. But either way, it was clearly very traumatic for him. Number 2, reduced to a skeleton. This all went down in Wolverine's tie-in issues for Civil War. In issue number 43 of the 2003 Wolverine series, Logan squares off with Nitro, the one responsible for killing almost all of the New Warriors as well as hundreds of civilians. Nitro's superpower makes him basically a living bomb, and it's this explosive power that he uses on Wolverine. The strength and heat of the explosion is so strong that it reduced Wolverine to just a skeleton, and yet within a few brief moments, I kid you not, Wolverine has almost completely regenerated and somehow healed, with flames still visible, licking at his back, and while he is still smoking from that explosion. That's bananas. Though of course this was the early 2000s, a time when Wolverine was pretty overpowered in the comics due to him being so crazy popular, so this was like peak healing factor times. All he needs is a few pages and he's like, I'm better. I'm like basically fully healed almost. Number 1, encased in liquid adamantium. Wolverine did actually die in the comics during the death of Wolverine's story. Sort of. But it ended up of course not being permanent, and eventually his corpse disappeared, and then once more Wolverine showed up again, back alive. However, this was a pretty good attempt at finally burying Wolverine from a writing standpoint. Or I guess less burying him, more turning his corpse into like kind of a morbid Wolverine monument. During the Death of Wolverine arc, we saw Wolverine's healing factor begin to dissipate and fail him as Wolverine learned that there seemed to be someone who wanted him dead. In truth, it was the head of the Weapon X program who sought Wolverine to try and duplicate his healing factor. He was trying to, do more adamantium bonding. When he learns that Wolverine no longer has his healing factor, the two end up in a fight against one another. As the founder of Weapon X, Dr. Cornelius attempts to escape by activating the adamantium bonding process on 3 remaining test subjects. Wolverine puts a stop to the process by breaking open the containers. However, this results in him getting covered in molten liquid adamantium, which ultimately encases, hardens, and then suffocates Logan to death. But then of course, Wolverine is later resurrected, regains his healing factor, and ultimately he returns again. So that's how he's alive now. Yay.
Coming in at number 10, we have the time Peter grew and then lost 4 additional arms, literally making him an 8-limbed freak. This event took place during a period of time in which being Spider-Man had brought Peter nothing but pain, with Gwen Stacy's father having recently passed away, and Gwen believing Spider-Man to be responsible. Thus, Peter decided to get rid of his double life by developing a serum to remove his spider abilities. Unfortunately, testing serums on yourself rarely works out in the Marvel Universe, and Peter's spider powers are amplified to the point that 4 additional arms burst forth out of his body. And while Spider-Man would eventually be able to balance out his life and lose the additional limbs, it's still a bizarre tale of body horror that Peter is lucky to have gotten out of unscathed. Coming in at number 9, we have getting trampled by the Rhino in the video game Spider-Man Miles Morales. This game is one of my favorites of the last couple years, and it opens with both Peter Parker and Miles Morales working together as Spider-Men to try and transport the Rhino safely to the supervillain prison. Unfortunately, the Rhino breaks free, and the opening tutorial of the game is trying to chase the villain down and stop his rampage. Unfortunately, since this is just the tutorial, Peter Parker does most of the fighting and winds up getting his butt kicked, getting hit with attacks that should definitely have shattered at least half the bones in his body. Luckily, Miles is eventually able to save the day by discovering his Venom Blast ability, but it's still a wonder how Spidey is able to even stand after all of that pummeling. Coming in at number 8, we have Firebrand burning Peter Parker alive. During another period where Spider-Man was a bit off his game, he got into a fight with the usually low-level villain Firebrand. Unfortunately, Spider-Man's taunts during the fight pushed Firebrand over the edge, causing him to fully unleash his power and blow up a city block. The resulting explosion was shown in graphic detail to burn both Peter's costume and his flesh, and the only reason he was able to survive without permanent scarring was due to the quick intervention of a hospital that usually only treats supervillains. I guess one perk of getting most of your face burnt off is that the doctors won't know exactly who they're healing. Nicely handled, Spider-Man. Coming in at number 7, we have the time Spider-Man had to take on the entire Sinister Six at once in the PlayStation 4 Spider-Man video game. After a breakout at the supervillain prison The Raft, Peter is faced with his worst nightmare when he's surrounded by the combined team of the Rhino, the Vulture, Scorpion, Electro, and Mr. Negative, who are more than enough to weaken Spider-Man before the arrival of the leader of the Sinister Six, Dr. Octopus, who up until this point had been a friend and mentor to this universe's Peter Parker. The betrayal cuts Peter deep, and his wounded body is thrown into New York Harbor, only barely surviving by holding on to a floating oil drum. This beatdown was so bad, Peter eventually needed a specialized costume to be strong enough to go up against Doc Ock once more. Coming in at number 6, we have the time that Spider-Man was tortured by the dark ancient sorcerer Kulan Goth. During a comic event that saw the entire city of Manhattan transformed into an alternate medieval fantasy version, Spider-Man was one of the few heroes who remembered the world as it truly was. As punishment for rebelling against Kulan Goth's rule, this version of Spider-Man was tortured and put on display for all of Kulan Goth's enemies to see. And while Spider-Man would eventually be restored once Kulan Goth was defeated and reality reverted back to normal, it's still incredibly disturbing to see one of Marvel's greatest heroes being put in such a violent situation. Coming in at number 5, we have the time Peter Parker became a literal spider monster. We've already covered a storyline on this list where Peter grew some extra limbs, but during an event in which the concept of the spider totems was first introduced into the Marvel mythology, Peter Parker found himself transformed into a gigantic spider-human hybrid, with horrifying mandibles and a hunger for human flesh. Eventually, this creature would appear to die and then be reborn as a fresh Peter Parker, now possessing organic web shooters. While this may have just been a really convoluted storyline to make Spidey's web status the same as the Tobey Maguire movies, it's still a body horror storyline that makes my skin crawl. Coming in at number 4, we have the time that Spider-Man lifted an entire building and lived to tell the tale. In one of the most iconic, defining moments for the entire character, Spider-Man found himself trapped under the rubble of a collapsed building, with water rapidly filling the area as well. In order to save the life of his Aunt May, Peter had to lift the weight of the entire building off of his back. This is the pivotal moment where Spider-Man showed just how strong he could be when the situation called for it, and just how far he was willing to push his body to save the lives of the people he loves, something that would go on to become a defining feature of the character. But seriously, Peter, you should probably get someone to spot you the next time you lift something that heavy. Coming in at number 3, we have the time that Deadpool accidentally killed and then resurrected Spider-Man twice. After a complicated series of events led to Deadpool being hired to kill his friend Spider-Man and being convinced that Peter had turned to evil, the Merc with a Mouth shot Peter Parker in the head unexpectedly at his apartment. This would be a pretty anticlimactic end to the Spectacular Spider-Man, however, and Deadpool eventually convinced his demon girlfriend of the time to resurrect his buddy, because comic books are weird like that. In a comedic twist, Deadpool would shoot Peter again after briefly thinking that he had once more turned to evil, but eventually everyone wound up alive and safe, even if this would continue to be one of the weirdest situations in Spider-Man's very weird history. Coming in at number 2, we have the so-called death of the Ultimate Spider-Man. In the comic book event that would lead to the debut of Miles Morales, the Peter Parker of the Ultimate Marvel Universe had to die before a new Spider-Man could rise. In a final battle against his nemesis, the Green Goblin, the teenage Peter Parker protected his family against Norman Osborn's relentless and crazed attacks, even after he'd already been mortally wounded by an assassin's bullet. While at the time this seemed like a tragic and dramatic end to the Ultimate Peter Parker, it would eventually be revealed that he actually survived this intense battle, as the Oz formula that gave him his spider abilities also functionally made this Peter Parker immortal. Maybe it's just a weird comic book retcon, but the fact that Peter survived so many injuries is truly mind-blowing, and I can't wait to see where the Ultimate Universe takes us next. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have Spider-Man's head-crushing defeat in the original Infinity Gauntlet event. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we may have all gotten our hearts broken by that classic, "I don't want to go, Mr. Stark," but the battle for the Infinity Gauntlet in the comics may have been even more brutal to Peter Parker than we'd ever want to see on the big screen. In the comics, Peter is able to briefly get the upper hand on Thanos with some web attacks to the face, but is then viciously beaten by Thanos' lady companion, Terraxia, who is shown to kill the wall crawler by attacking him with a rock. Pretty brutal for a Cosmic Marvel event. And while by the end of Infinity Gauntlet all of the killed heroes would be restored, this might just be one of the most bone-crushing losses ever suffered by Spider-Man.
Number 10, drowning. We talked about Wolverine's battle with Tiger Shark on part 1 of this list, but later on in that same series, there's also a time when Wolverine/Patch seems to have been adrift in the ocean for quite some time and washes up later on shore alive. This almost implies that if you take Wolverine out of the water, he could potentially recover from drowning. So you could really only kill him by drowning if you kept him under there. Either that or he managed to stay afloat long enough to keep his brain alive before passing out, getting tossed around some more, and then washing up on shore later. So perhaps he's only been passed out for a few minutes. It seems as though he has suffered some brain damage, at least, from this underwater journey, as Logan also suffers from amnesia when he first wakes up. It takes a bullet to the head to loosen his memories and make him remember why he came there in the first place. Unfortunately, by then, it's a little too late. His plan was to warn the people of the village he arrived at, but by then they were already under attack. To read this whole story and the account of his drowning and washing up ashore, you need to check out the Lazarus Project story arc from the 1988 series. Near the end of issue 27 is where he dives into the water, and then we see him wash up without his memory in issue 28. Number 9, stabbed too fast. Technically, this killed Wolverine, but in the same issue in which he died, he was right back up and at him again, so I think we can still count it as a survival moment, because he recovers. He did come back from it, and ultimately he did survive. Also, this death is pretty ridiculous, which is also why I feel like it needs to be mentioned. In issue number 20 of the 2003 Wolverine series, during the Enemy of the State story arc, in the same issue in which he was introduced, Gorgon kills Wolverine by stabbing him real fast. He stabs so fast, Wolverine's healing factor can't even keep up. Okay. Wolverine dies, but in the same issue is resurrected and returns, now an agent of Hydra. And of course, welcome to Enemy of the State. An iconic story, but one with kind of a weird start. And friends, before I move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more Wolverine lists, boy oh boy do I want to give them to you. In fact, I think we could even do a part 3 of just ridiculous things that Wolverine has survived. So let us know you love it by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, attempted decapitation. There was a time when Wolverine was nearly decapitated decapitated by Conan the Barbarian himself and still managed to keep on walking. His near decapitation broke a sword and then of course was later covered by his hand on the back of his neck, for censorship reasons I imagine, so you can't quite see it, but it did happen. And this did happen in a what if, so it's considered alternate reality, I should mention, but I still think it's pretty impressive and wild that Wolverine tussled with Conan, got dealt the brunt of his decapitative force, and managed to survive it. And just get back up like it was nothing. Also, I feel like Conan would know when he's pretty much decapitated someone, because I feel like he probably does that a lot, so he literally was like, I gave him the whole decapitation swing, and I don't know, he's probably dead. Number 7, weaponized healing factor. When facing the Omegas in the 2010 Uncanny X-Force series in issue 26, Wolverine had his whole healing factor turn against him, being weaponized by Omega Red with Omega Blue and Omega Black in tow. The Omegas. Omega Red basically makes it so that Wolverine's immune system is working on overdrive, basically being tricked into thinking that his whole body is like a disease that needs to be fought off, so his immune system starts attacking all his organs, oh no. As a result, he becomes a giant mass of pus, decay, and inflammation. Wolverine's heart struggles against the internal attack, and in the end, his only solution to surviving is to cut himself open and basically let all the infectious bits that are there internally fall out of him. It's quite grotesque, but it does seem to work. And of course, he does survive. Just like him being like, I guess I gotta just cut myself open. I'm like, oh, okay. Alrighty then. Gross. Number 6, actual decapitation. In Ultimate Wolverine vs. Hulk, issue number 5, Wolverine ends up getting full-on decapitated by S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury. This, of course, is in the Ultimate Universe, as it is an Ultimate comic. So it isn't 616 Wolverine, but it's still Wolverine. Wolverine of 1610, but still. Fury tells Wolverine that they are holding his body in an undisclosed location and reveals that they ran some experiments on Wolverine's head and body and have learned that his mutation seems to be more about survival than healing. How is he able to breathe without a body as a decapitated head? Apparently, his head has adapted to use his skin to breathe instead. So Ultimate Wolverine can actually survive decapitation and a slew of other things, just no problemo. He could survive almost anything in the Ultimate reality. Almost anything. Still dies in that reality, so you know. Number 5, escape velocity. We've seen Wolverine able to navigate the vacuum and coldness of space without proper equipment and survive pretty reasonably. But how about a hit so hard that it got him up to escape velocity, blasting him into orbit? Well, surprisingly, that wasn't much of a problem for Wolverine either. We see that happen in issue 108 of the first X-Men volume. Here he runs into a little fella named Jaff. But like Wolverine, just because he might be smaller in stature does not mean he is a pushover. Jaff punches Wolverine so hard he launches him up into space, but thanks to his healing factor, he manages to still survive that hard hit. And survive space. I mean, I think it's pretty cool that Wolverine can just survive space. That's nuts. Number 4, fall back from space. I like space, so I'm gonna talk about space some more. In Return of Wolverine issue number 5, Logan goes up against Persephone. Not wanting to be her puppet and not interested in the seeming fresh start she's offering him after bringing him back from the dead, he decides to escape their conversation and finds out what her master plan is. When he learns it has to do with basically mind controlling potentially the whole planet, he decides to intervene. The last satellite to be removed that could allow Persephone to take control of up to a few million people at the time happens to be the station he is on. So he decides the best course of action is to also disable that, bringing it crashing down to Earth. Logan himself had just survived being hit with a poisonous gas and jumping out into the vacuum of space. And even after that, he still manages to survive re-entry on a crashing station that would get impossibly hot, like really hot in there. The station lands in the ocean with Logan literally on fire as he slams into it. As a charred and burnt crisp, he emerges from the water and is fortunately brought to shore by some very shocked but obviously helpful fishermen. Hopefully they did have beer for you, Wolverine. Number 3, launched into the sun. During the dawn of X period of the current modern X-Men books, back in issue number 4 of House of X, Wolverine suffered what would appear to be a very permanent death in the fight against Orcus. a team was assembled to take out the mother mold that Orcus was building up in space, a massive mother mold, before it could be completed and come online. Wolverine was the one to deal that final blow to it. Nightcrawler teleported him to outside the station where the mother mold was docked, sacrificing his own life in the process. It was then up to Logan, who slashed through the dock, freeing the mother mold from the station so that he could launch it into the sun, and of course him with it. In current X times though, we have resurrection protocols on our side. Yay, resurrection protocols, which allow fallen mutants to be returned to Krakoa. So while Wolverine did die from this, he was soon returned via resurrection protocols back to life. And for those who are wondering, the returning of his adamantium bonded skeleton each time is actually all thanks to Proteus, which fortunately means it's probably a lot less painful than other adamantium bonding processes that Logan has had to suffer through, because Proteus can just be like, I warp reality, now you have adamantium. Of course, he can only do that because that's how Wolverine was before, so he can't just like make adamantium, just to be clear. He's not an adamantium making machine, okay guys? Number 2, adamantium bonding process. On part 1 of this list, we talked about when Wolverine has had the adamantium ripped from his body, and namely his skeleton. But how about just getting the adamantium in the first place? The adamantium bonding process is notoriously dangerous, and there are many test subjects who have come before and after Logan who simply did not survive it. Now, consider that Wolverine hasn't just had the adamantium bonded to his skeleton one time, but actually has had it bonded to him multiple times in his life. Considering how painful and deadly this process is, it's pretty amazing that Wolverine was able to survive this, even with his healing factor, and that he has been through it more than once in his lifetime. He's also gone through the adamantium bonding process before without even emerging with it bonded to him, rejecting said adamantium. That's multiple big ouches, bub. I can't imagine going through it and then just not even having adamantium at the end of that. That would suck. Number 1, burned up by the sun. Yep, the sun death has happened more than once, but the sun is pretty ultimate, so I felt like I had to talk about it again. I mean, it is a very permanent way to kill Wolverine when you think about it. In New X-Men issue 148, Wolverine has a moment where he's finally ready to say goodbye to everything. He prepares to throw himself into the sun with Jean Grey's body in tow. This is after Jean and Wolverine cannot find a way out of the trap that they've fallen into and are basically about to be launched into the sun. They do their best to find a way out of this predicament, but unfortunately, they can't seem to escape, and it's just getting hotter and hotter in there. When they both seem resigned to their fate, Logan decides to try and make the experience less painful for Jean by running her through with his claws, because that's what Wolverine does. Then, holding her body, he greets the sun as they arrive at their final destination. However, in issue 150 of New X-Men, it's revealed that Wolverine and Jean actually survived this, because the Phoenix consciousness was awoken by Jean's death. She actually needed to die in order to tap into the Phoenix Force and resurrect, rising from the ashes quite literally. She was able to res Logan again and create and pilot a ship construct in order to bring them back to Earth. So he even survived walking into the sun. That's bananas. Gotta love all those reses just saving your butt.